Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary.
And as this discussion comes to a close, we'll go to live coverage of the U.S. Senate. The Senate is expected to spend much of the day debating whether to proceed to a bill continuing the Violence Against Women Act. It expires this year. Senators switched gears yesterday and started work on the motion to proceed to the bill after another measure reforming the U.S. Postal Service ran into controversy over amendments. And now to live coverage of the U.S. Senate.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Gracious God, our shelter from life's storms, give to the members of this body a faith strong enough to face the tempests of our time. Strengthen them to confront with courage the challenges that come, knowing that your purposes will prevail and that your providence will sustain them. Lord, help this day with singleness of purpose and constancy of commitment, your senators, to seek first your kingdom and your righteousness, serving you with unfettered feet and following you with freedom and faith. Reign as sovereign Lord in this chamber. Guide the deliberations, debates, and decisions of this day. We pray in your holy name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., April 18, 2012. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Kirsten E. Gillibrand, a senator from the state of New York, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Majority Leader.
Falling Leader remarks. We will resume consideration of the motion to proceed as 1925, violence against women. The majority will control the first 30 minutes, Republicans the final 30 minutes. Filing deadline for first agreements to the substitute amendment to the Postal Reform Bill is 1 o'clock this afternoon. I really hope that we can work an agreement out on the Postal Reform Bill. I spoke to Senator Lieberman late last night, the chairman of the committee, and he is hopeful, as I am, that we can move forward on this legislation. It's a shame if we can't. As we speak, there's more than 500,000 men and women working for the Postal Service. 25% of them are returned veterans. And we have 30,000 post offices around the country. We have about 8 million people that depend on the post office for their jobs. So to think that we can't move forward on this would be really untoward. Something we really, really need to get done. And I'm hopeful that we can get that done. There's People could offer amendments, and we should do that as quickly as possible to move forward on this legislation. If there's no agreement, we'll have to vote on the substitute amendment tomorrow morning. It would be, I repeat, too bad that we can't get it done. Madam President, enshrined in the Constitution by the Founding Fathers, the United States Postal Service has delivered this nation's letters and other mail since the day of the quill pen and the inkwell. That's why, Madam President, we have here inkwells. That's what these are. I have paper clips in mine now, but it was originally because that's the only way people could write. They sat at these desks and did their work. It was for, most of the time, it was from mail. Mail's been delivered through the years when stamps cost a nickel. Mail's been delivered through the years when mail traveled up and down America's waterways by steamship, and it's been delivered through 2 world wars when soldiers sent letters home to their sweethearts and family. Through it all, the United States Postal Service has been there to deliver the mail, rain or shine. But today, America's postal system is in crisis. You know, we kind of, that's a throwaway, through rain or shine. When I was a little boy, Madam President, we had really bad snowstorms all over the West, but in Searchlight, Nevada, we got a little snow a few times a year, but we had 3 feet of snow on the level. It was very, very bad. But I can remember a man, his name was Con Hudgens. The mail came to Searchlight. It was, there was a railroad went through Nipton, California, which was 22 miles from Searchlight. And as that train sped through Nipton, they had an apparatus that would snatch the mail that was on the train. And that mail was for Searchlight. They sorted it that way. This old man, Con Hudgens, walked through snow 22 miles to bring the mail. That's what we talk about when we say mail's been delivered through rain or shine. That's the mantra of the post office. But today, America's postal system is in crisis. Today, a personal note from a friend or payment to the electric company can be delivered online with a few quick keystrokes on your computer. This changing technology has meant serious new challenges for an organization that has served the citizens of this nation from its very beginning. It serves this nation whether they live on city streets or rural routes. Although the world that the post office deals with has changed, the postal system's message and mission has not changed. That is to deliver letters, packages, medicines, many of whom, much of which is vital, online purchases, birthday cards, phone bills, to hundreds of millions of Americans, no matter how rural or how urban the places they call home. Neither has the current crisis changed the importance of that mission. Nearly half of rural households don't have broadband internet access, making it difficult or impossible to pay bills or ship packages online. Rural families in Tuscarora, Nevada, or Baker, Nevada, in Elko County, Nevada, rely on the Postal Service. That's their way of communicating. Small businesses benefit from cost-saving options offered at the post office, such as bulk mail. American businesses rely on the United States Postal Service. As I indicated earlier, 8 million people's jobs are dependent on the Postal Service. For seniors who can't leave their homes, mail carriers deliver life-saving medications and an important link to the outside world. Elderly Americans rely on the United States Postal Service. Madam President, I'll come home tonight and here in my home here in Washington, and there will be some mail there. A lot of it is what some people refer to as junk mail. But for the people that are sending that mail, it's very important. And talking about seniors, seniors love to get the junk mail. It's sometimes their only way of communicating or feeling they're part of the real world. Elderly Americans, more than any other group of people in America, rely on the United States Postal Service. But unless we act quickly, thousands of post offices, as I indicated, there's more than 30,000 in America, many of them rural, will close. I've said this earlier today, I repeat it. These rural post offices is the only way that people have in those small communities to communicate with the outside world. It may be some medicine they're getting, it may keep in touch with their family or friends, but it's their way of keeping in touch with the world. Hundreds of mail processing facilities will close, and the jobs of hundreds of thousands of dedicated postal employees are at risk. Timely, dependable mail delivery isn't the only thing at stake in this debate. Today, the Postal Service employs, as I've indicated, more than 500,000 middle-class workers. And the postal system gives more than 130,000 men and women who volunteered for this country in the armed services a chance to serve again. A quarter of all postal employees are veterans of the United States Armed Forces. So there's really a lot at stake at this debate. The Postal Service has been playing an important role in the history of this country and the lives of its citizens for more than 200 years. It has also seen a 21% drop in mail volume over the last 5 years and is on the verge of insolvency. Yesterday, the Postal Service lost about $20 million one day. Changing times demand a leaner, more modern post office. And to make that possible, we must pass legislation. The Senate must act. We must change the Postal Service business model. They can't do it on their own. They need legislation. They need it to keep pace with technology and keep up with the times. The bipartisan bill before this body enacts reforms that are Madam President, the bipartisan bill before this body enacts reforms that are major, but they're very measured. The people have worked on this so hard. Senator Lieberman, I've already talked about him. His counterpart, Republican, Senator Collins, has worked extremely hard. She and I worked with her to maintain the 6-day delivery. This is something she believes in strongly. I really admire her for the fight that she's put up to get things that she feels is important in this legislation. But if we don't act, it would reduce the number of employees and facilities the Postal Service maintains in a responsible way if we act. And that it would protect employees and millions of Americans who rely on the mail. It would responsibly restructure the postal system while preserving overnight and 6-day-a-week delivery. It would help the Postal Service innovate and grow by offering new products that will attract new customers. And most importantly, it would save the Postal Service from insolvency. It will help an institution enshrined in the Constitution modernize to meet the challenges of a changing world. What Senator Lieberman and Collins have come up with is not perfect, and we all recognize that. It's not a perfect compromise. It won't make every senator happy. It won't make every American happy. It won't save every post office. But it's a good compromise, a real good compromise, and one that's bipartisan. And it'll save an institution that's been a part of the fabric of this nation for more than 200 years. So let's work together to save the American Postal Service, which, by the way, is the best in the world. I note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President, I ask that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection. Republican Leader.
With gas prices hovering around $4 a gallon, I think it's important for the American people to realize there are really two camps on this issue here in Washington. There are those who want to do something about the problem, and there are those who want people to think they're doing something about the problem. And let's be clear, President Obama is firmly planted in the say anything but do nothing camp. If there were any doubt about that, he dispelled it when he blocked the Keystone Pipeline, and then again this week by embracing the age-old Democratic dodge of blaming gas prices on speculators. Look, what bothers Americans isn't that the President has unpopular views on this issue. Everyone knows he doesn't really support an all-of-the-above approach to energy. What bothers people is the fact that he pretends like he does. What bothers people is the President blocking one half of the pipeline one day, then showing at a ribbon cutting for the other half on another day. It's blocking domestic energy and then taking credit for increases that came about as a result of his predecessor's decisions. It's pretending that speculators have a big impact on the price of gas when his own staff can't point to any impact. The President said he was different, and a lot of people believed him. But to a growing number of Americans, that's just what he's become. Just one more politician saying the same things they always say. This week has been a real clarifier for people when it comes to this President. Whether it's the Buffett tax that won't lower the deficit or a commission on speculators that even the White House says won't lower the price of gas, what they've seen this week is a President who seems a lot more interested in looking like he's solving problems than actually solving them. For years, Washington Democrats have had the same rigid, totally rigid opposition to expanding domestic energy exploration. The only people they seem to listen to are the extremists. But instead of just stating their position and letting the political chips fall where they may, they pull out the same poll-tested talking points they always do on the assumption that reporters will just reprint them like it's the first time they've used them and that everybody else will just somehow forget. But with gas prices at about $4 a gallon, it's time somebody called them out on it. 10 years ago today, Democrats voted down a bill to open up a tiny area of Alaska known as ANWR to drilling. They relied on the non-argument that it would take too long to get the oil to market. That was 10 years ago today. Too long to get the oil to market. Every Democrat who was asked about it said the same thing. It would take too long to get the oil to market. I've got 2 pages of quotes from Democrats saying it would take at least 7 to 10 years to get the oil to market. Well, here we are, 10 years later. In some places, gas prices now are 3 times what they were in April of 2002. The U.S. still imports half its oil. ANWR is still off limits. And if you ask Democrats why they oppose more domestic exploration, they'll tell you the same thing they did 10 years ago. This is precisely the kind of thing this President campaigned against 4 years ago. He was the one who was going to stop kicking the can down the road. He was the one who was going to tackle the problems everybody else was afraid to face. He was the one who was going to rise above petty squabbles and the tired talking points of the past and offer something different. He was a different kind of politician who would usher in a new era of authenticity. And what did the American people get? They got the same gimmicks as before. They got someone whose idea of solving a problem is to give a speech about it or to blame whatever person, place, or thing doesn't happen to poll well that day. What the American people got was a president who absolutely refuses to lead. It's the same thing they got from the Democratic-controlled Senate. The same tired talking points, the same evasion, the same refusal to address our problems head on. Yesterday, the chairman of the Budget Committee made it official for the third year in a row. Senate Democrats will refuse to do the basic work of governance by refusing to offer a budget blueprint for government spending, by the way, as required by law. After pledging both to me and his Republican counterpart on the committee that he would, in fact, mark up a budget this year, the chairman of the Budget Committee bowed once again to the political pressure and said he won't put his Democratic colleagues at any political risk by asking them to vote on a plan their constituents might not like, that is, not until after the election. The Democrat chairman did suggest, however, that if Europe implodes, he might change his mind. Well, with all due respect, a statute doesn't say the majority must present a budget if the European economy implodes. That's not in the statute. It says it must present a budget, period, so that the American people can see how much they're going to be taxed and how their tax dollars are going to be spent. So I'm having a hard time thinking of a word to describe the level of leadership we're getting from Democrats in Washington these days, whether it's the President or the Democratic Senate. Frankly, Madam President, it's a disgrace. There isn't a single issue I can think of that we're willing to do anything about. Under this President's watch, Washington has been spending more than $1 trillion a year more than it takes in. And Senate Democrats don't even have the courage to put it all in black and white. They don't have any problem spending it. They just don't want to be on record voting for it. That's what passes for leadership in Washington these days. Well, something's got to give. Our challenges are too urgent. The status quo just won't cut it anymore. Now, on another matter, I'd like to say a word this morning about the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. This is the federal agency that ensures the safety of our nation's nuclear power plants. Specifically, I want to bring attention to the reappointment of Christine Svinicki, or rather the curious lack of action surrounding her reappointment. Commissioner Svinicki is one of the most respected commissioners ever to serve at the NRC. She's an experienced and fair-minded regulator whose leadership has earned her the admiration of members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. She was confirmed for her first term without a single dissenting vote. Prior to her 4 years on the Commission, Commissioner Svinicki spent more than 2 decades in public service working on nuclear safety issues in the Senate, at the Department of Energy, and with the Wisconsin Public Utilities Commission. A nuclear engineer, she is one of the world's foremost authorities on nuclear safety and nuclear power, and a great asset to the Commission. And last year, Commissioner Svinicki had the courage to stand up and blow the whistle on sitting NRC Chairman Gregory Jaczko for bullying subordinates. According to an Associated Press story from December, quote, the commissioners told Congress that women at the NRC felt particularly intimidated by Jaczko. Commissioner William Magwood, who's a Democrat, by the way, told the same oversight panel that Jaczko had bullied and belittled at least 3 female staff members, one of whom told Magwood she was humiliated by what Magwood called a raging verbal assault. This is the Democratic commissioner on the NRC. Here's an excerpt from the Inspector General's report. Several current and former commission staff members, it says, said the chairman's behavior caused an intimidating work environment. A former chairman told OIG that the chairman often yelled at people and that his tactics had a negative effect on people. He described the behavior as ruling by intimidation. Now, Commissioner Svinicki stood up to this guy, who somehow managed to avoid being fired in the wake of all these revelations. in an effort to preserve the integrity of the agency and to protect the career staffers who were the subject of the chairman's tactics. And now, for some mysterious reason, she's being held up for renomination. Look, the FBI completed its background check on Commissioner Svinicki 15 months ago. Her ethics agreement was approved around the same time. She's been ready to go for more than a year. There is no legitimate reason for Commissioner Svinicki not to be renominated and reconfirmed by now. And any further delay is unacceptable. If Commissioner Svinicki isn't renominated by June 30th, the NRC will lose one of its finest members. The Commission's work will be impaired, and we will be forced to conclude that the reason is related to her honorable actions as a whistleblower, that she's being held up in retaliation for speaking up against a rogue chairman who bullies his subordinates. There's a reason Congress charged 5 commissioners with the responsibility to protect public health and safety. Ensuring the safety of our nation's nuclear power plants is serious business. So this morning I'm calling on the White House to renominate Commissioner Svinicki today to ensure that this well-qualified and widely respected woman remains in place for another term. The public is best served by a commission that is fully functional. There should be no question in anybody's mind that it will be fully functional. We can't wait any longer for this nomination. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of the motion to proceed to S1925, which the clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 312, S1925, a bill to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act of 1994.
Under the previous order, the first hour will be equally divided and controlled between the 2 leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first 30 minutes and the Republicans controlling the second 30 minutes.
Madam President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Madam President, on the, just to follow up briefly on the subject of leadership in Washington, perhaps the Speaker of the House could show some leadership on jobs by calling up the bipartisan 75 to 22 jobs highway bill that passed this Senate, that is widely supported and whose delay is actually costing us jobs because of the summer construction season wasting away as these extensions go on. So there would be some leadership that would really mean something for jobs here in America. But I'm rising today to address the need that we have here in the Senate for comprehensive cybersecurity legislation, and I'd like to speak for up to 15 minutes, if I could have unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Our nation's inadequate cybersecurity poses an ever-growing threat to our safety, a threat to our prosperity, and a threat to our privacy. Attackers go after our intellectual property, our national security, and our critical infrastructure. The McAfee Night Dragon report, for example, concluded that foreign intruders had had access to major oil, energy, and petrochemical companies' computer networks for at least 2 years, and likely as many as 4 years. Government reports are equally sobering, though usually classified. One that's not classified is the Department of Homeland Security report recently that attacks on computer systems which control critical infrastructure, factories, and databases increased almost 8-fold in just the last 12 months. Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta has warned that the next Pearl Harbor we confront could very well be a cyber attack. Majority Leader Reid has recognized the severity of this national and economic security threat and intends to bring cybersecurity legislation to the Senate floor soon. We recognize, too, the hard work of Chairman Lieberman and Ranking Member Collins of the Homeland Security Committee, as well as Chairman Feinstein of the Intelligence Committee and Chairman Rockefeller of the Commerce Committee. The Cybersecurity Act of 2012, which they introduced and I'm proud to co-sponsor, is a good start towards addressing the many cybersecurity threats that face this nation. The Secure IT Act, introduced by Senator McCain and 7 colleagues, seeks to improve the sharing of cybersecurity threat information, the Federal Information Security Management Act, or FISMA, which governs cybersecurity at federal agencies, and our cyber research and development. There's considerable overlap between these bills, which signals that the Senate could legislate on cybersecurity in a bipartisan and serious manner. Support for cybersecurity legislation also is bicameral. The Cybersecurity Task Force, constituted by House Republicans, produced recommendations that share key points with our Cybersecurity Act of 2012. Numerous bills are working their way through the House on a bipartisan basis. Central to that work in the House are the contributions of Rhode Island Congressman Jim Langevin. His leadership is a major reason that the House has come to recognize the dangerous vulnerabilities within our critical infrastructure, and that we now stand on the verge of a breakthrough in improving the security of those networks. When a test at the Idaho National Labs showed that hackers could blow up a power generator from thousands of miles away, Congressman Langevin brought the owners and operators of our electric grid before Congress and investigated their promise that the issue was being addressed. When he found out that that wasn't true, he called them out. His subsequent work as a co-chair of the Center for Strategic and International Studies Commission on Cybersecurity, along with other experts from within and outside of government, resulted in many of the recommendations reflected in our legislation. Then, in 2010, Congressman Langevin passed a landmark cybersecurity amendment in the House that provided a legislative template for setting standards for critical infrastructure. I thank Jim Langevin, my colleague from Rhode Island, for his relentless commitment to keeping America safe in cyberspace. I'm here this morning to stress 4 points that I believe we must keep in mind as we take up cybersecurity legislation. The first is that cybersecurity legislation should improve the public's limited awareness of current cybersecurity threats and the harm that those threats present to our national security, economy, and privacy. The public, for years, has been kept in the dark, and that is wrong. The corporate sector systematically underreports cyber attacks for fear of scaring customers, for fear of encouraging competitors, or for fear of triggering regulatory review. I was pleased that the Securities and Exchange Commission, after prompting by Senator Rockefeller, myself, and others, issued guidance for when registered companies must disclose breach information. The government itself systematically underreports cyber attacks because it overclassifies information about cyber attacks on government systems. Jim Lewis of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, for example, recently explained that cybersecurity has a unique problem in that some of the most reliable data is classified. It was a rare exception when a November 2011 report by the Office of the National Counterintelligence Executive identified China and Russia as responsible for the systematic theft of American intellectual property through cyber espionage. The legislation that we pass must shed light on the scale and severity of the cyber threat to the American public. In that vein, I'm pleased that the Cybersecurity Act of 2012 includes provisions from the Cybersecurity Public Awareness Act, Senate S. 813, which I introduced with Senator Kyle. These provisions will at least begin to improve the public's awareness of the current cyber threat environment we face. Second, we must recognize that inadequate awareness and inadequate protection against cyber risks is endemic among our largest corporations. Part of the problem is a gulf in cybersecurity awareness between corporate chief information officers and corporate CEOs. Carnegie Mellon's Scilab recently reported this: boards and senior management still are not exercising appropriate governance over the privacy and security of their digital assets. These findings are consistent with the complaints by CISOs and CSOs that they cannot get the attention of their senior management and boards, and their budgets are inadequate. There is still an apparent disconnect, end quote. Nor is this an area in which the market can be trusted to work. As former Bush Secretary of Homeland Security Michael Chertoff has explained, and I quote, "The marketplace is likely to fail in allocating the correct amount of investment to manage risk across the breadth of the networks on which our society relies." This is just not an area where corporations manage adequately on their own. FBI Director Robert Mueller recently explained there are only two types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that will be. Even more trenchantly, the McAfee report on the shady rat attacks similarly stated that it is possible to divide, and I quote, "the entire set of Fortune Global 2000 firms into two categories, those that know they've been compromised and those that don't yet know." Kevin Mandia of the leading security firm Mandiant has explained, this is another quote, "In over 90% of the cases we have responded to, government notification was required to alert the company that a security breach was underway. In our last 50 incidents, 48 of the victim companies learned they were breached from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Department of Defense, or some other third party." The National Cybersecurity Investigative Joint Task Force, led by the FBI, told me the same thing. More than 90% of the time, the corporate victim had no idea. What we can conclude from this is that improved sharing of cybersecurity threat information is necessary, but is not sufficient to protect our nation's cybersecurity. Even a perfect information sharing process will not prevent cyber attacks if the information being shared is incomplete. The blindness of most corporations to this threat limits the effectiveness of corporate-to-corporate information sharing. The NSA's Defense Industrial Base pilot, the so-called DIB pilot, proved that the government can share classified information with trusted corporations, but it revealed significant risks and limitations, particularly if the government were to share its most sensitive intelligence information with a broad set of private companies. The third point I want to make this morning, and perhaps the most important, is that this legislation on cybersecurity will have failed if it does not ensure that our American critical infrastructure has adequate cybersecurity. There must be a process for identifying critical infrastructure, establishing appropriate security standards, and ensuring that critical infrastructure companies meet the standard. If an attack comes, we must be sure that America's most capable defenses and countermeasures are pre-positioned to defend critical American infrastructure. We simply cannot wait until an attack is underway on basic needs and services we depend on, like our electric grid, our communications networks, and the servers that process our financial transactions. So there really are two measures here. One is that we must have a way to define critical infrastructure so we know what it is, and just as important from a civil liberties perspective, we know what it isn't. When we identify critical infrastructure on which our safety and economic and national security depend, we are also defining what does not qualify and where privacy concerns can be much more important than national security concerns. Nobody wants government in our chat rooms, emails, or social media. Everyone gets why government should protect the electric grids that bring power to our homes. And the second is that once we identify our critical infrastructure, we need to find a way for our national security assets to protect that critical infrastructure. Our government just has unique capabilities to protect those basics like our electric grid. As Kevin Mandia has explained, the majority of threat intelligence is currently in the hands of the government. Some of this information can be disclosed, but some cannot be, in order to protect sensitive sources and methods. This requires us to find other ways for our most sophisticated government capabilities to protect our critical infrastructure. For example, we should think seriously about the concept of secure domains and how they can be deployed effectively while protecting civil liberties. I'm glad that Section 804 of the Cybersecurity Act of 2012 takes on that task by requiring an expert study of the advantages and disadvantages of establishing secure domains for critical infrastructure. If the business community can identify a workable alternative approach, such as a voluntary or opt-in regulatory system, I am willing to get to work, but we must not balk at taking on the hard question of how to secure our critical American infrastructure. The last point I want to make today is that Congress in this bill should consider the appropriate structure and resources for the cybersecurity and cybercrime mission of the Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and law enforcement components of the Department of Homeland Security. We do not do enough to investigate, prosecute, and take other appropriate legal action against cybercrime, cyber espionage, and other cyber threats. Last year's takedown by the Department of Justice of the Coreflood botnet should be a regular occurrence, not a special occurrence. But it will not be, it cannot be, with our current cybercrime resources. The technical, international, and legal aspects of these investigations are too complex. I spent 4 years as a United States Attorney. I spent 4 years as our state's Attorney General. These are astonishingly complicated and difficult cases. They are massively resource intensive. So it is time for a fundamental rethinking of cyber law enforcement resources, both the level of resources and the manner in which they're structured. We should be discussing whether cybercrime should have a dedicated investigatory agency akin to the DEA or ATF, or whether existing task force models should be used. These are important questions that the legislation has not addressed. Accordingly, I plan to offer a floor amendment that will require an expert study of our current cyber law enforcement resources that can recommend a proper level of funding and structure of forces going forward. Once again, I thank my colleagues for their hard work to date on cybersecurity issues. I urge that all of us join together to pass cybersecurity legislation into law as soon as possible. 2 years ago, I said that because of cyber, we in the United States are on the losing end of the largest transfer of wealth through theft and piracy in the history of the world. General Keith Alexander, who leads the National Security Agency and U.S. Cyber Command, has reached the same conclusion, saying recently, cyber theft is, quote, the greatest transfer of wealth in history. And McAfee, likewise, has recently evaluated the theft of national secrets, source code, designs, and other documents and concluded that what, quote, we have witnessed over the past 5 to 6 years has been nothing short of a historically unprecedented transfer of wealth. Madam President, we are the losers in that transfer of wealth. We cannot afford to wait to address this enormous and ever-growing threat. I thank you, and I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Oregon.
Madam President, shortly we will be turning to the legislation to reform the Postal Service, and I wanted to take just a few minutes to talk about a particularly important part of that discussion. Madam President, in recent years, there has been a revolution in how our citizens exercise their right to vote. Instead of every American showing up in person, more and more Americans are choosing to vote by mail, using absentee ballots, no excuse absentee voting, or in the case of my home state of Oregon, the entire election is conducted by mail. This amendment that I will be offering and I'm discussing this morning, that I join Senator Feinstein and other colleagues in, is designed to protect the millions of Americans who choose to use the post office to exercise their right to vote. This amendment protects those millions of Americans from any kind of postal delay that could disrupt their ability to ensure that their vote is counted. Now, Madam President, my home state of Oregon has a system in which all ballots are cast by mail. In Oregon, if the ballots are not delivered by mail to the county election offices by the deadline on election night, they are not counted. So it's essential to the conduct of fair elections in my home state that delivery of ballots cast by mail not be delayed. To prevent the potential threat to our elections from delayed mail delivery, the Wyden-Feinstein amendment would place a moratorium on the closure of postal facilities until November 13, 2012, in states that vote by mail or allow any voter to vote, no excuse, absentee. It would also require the Postal Service to notify election officials of closings and consolidations, and require that the Postal Service study the effect of closing or consolidating a mail processing facility on the ability of the affected community to vote by mail. Now, my home state, Madam President, consistently has high voter turnout. Vote by mail has been successful, and it is popular. In our state, more than 85% of registered voters participated in the 2008 elections. But this kind of approach to voting, Madam President, is popular not just in my home state of Oregon. In the 2008 election, 89% of ballots in Washington state were cast by mail, as well as 64% of those in Colorado, over 50% in Arizona, and it was nearly that high a percentage in California. In my home state, the Postal Service is a place where people send and receive packages, mail-order prescriptions, and it's a place that also community residents come to gather. And so it seems to me that if we're going to close and consolidate, postal facilities, not only will it harm the delivery of ballots and campaign-related mail to voters and return of the ballots to election officials, but it also will sap much of what is vital to rural America, and that's the opportunity to come and gather in one place. Madam President, Jordan Valley, located in beautiful eastern Oregon on the Nevada border, is 457 miles from Portland. With the proposed consolidations, the nearest regional processing center would literally be almost 500 miles away. If the United States Postal Service goes ahead with their proposed closures and consolidations, then a ballot cast in Jordan Valley could travel approximately 1,000 miles before it reaches the hands of elected officials. This is unacceptable for constituents who vote in the far corners, the rural corners of my state. Cuts to the Postal Service mean that ballots mailed in the final days before an election may not get to election officials in time to be counted. Ballots sent the weekend before a Tuesday vote may not get into the hands of election officials by the present-day deadline of Election Day. Closing and consolidating postal facilities disproportionately harms the ability of rural residents to have their votes counted. Now, these issues raise important questions. Are closing postal facilities in states that primarily vote by mail a responsible approach? For me and many of my constituents and the millions of Americans who've chosen to vote this fashion, the resounding answer is no, this is not a responsible approach. Closing processing facilities and potentially impacting the delivery of ballots in a general election is a risk not worth it. Closing postal facilities will have unintended and unforeseen consequences on the impact of elections. So that's why this amendment would place a moratorium on the closure of postal facilities until November 13, 2012 in states that conduct all their elections by mail or permit no excuse absentee voting to ensure that elections are fair. No excuse voting, Madam President, of course, allows any voter to vote absentee without having to offer additional reasons for their making that choice. Madam President, 27 states allow no excuse absentee voting. So not only will the constituents that I and Senator Merkley and Senator Feinstein and Senator Boxer represent in Oregon and California be affected by this amendment, but states such as Nevada, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Iowa, Kansas, Maine, Nebraska, New Jersey, New Mexico, North Carolina, Ohio, Oklahoma, Utah, Wisconsin, and Wyoming are just part of the many communities in this country that this amendment would protect. In September of 2011, Madam President, election officials in California were doing their jobs and preparing and mailing sample ballots for September election in an isolated community in Northern California. Unaware that the small post office that serves the area was closing on October 1st, the sample ballots were not immediately returned, so they had no reason to believe that the voters there had not received them. But as ballots slowly trickled in, election officials grew a bit suspicious, and they learned that many voters had just received their sample ballot more than 3 weeks after it was mailed, and many had not received their official ballot yet. Election officials received no more than 2 or 3 a day, literally for the first week. Voters explained to officials that there was so much confusion, Madam President, over the closure of the post office that they were much more concerned about receiving their other first-class mail, bills, and prescriptions than their ballots because they hadn't been looking for them. They were told that the contents of their post office box was being directed to the Arcata post office. But when they went to Arcata to retrieve it, there was no mail for them in Arcata. For 18 days, Madam President, they didn't receive any mail at all. Now, only 15 days before the election, the staff attempted several times to contact the Arcata post office, but could only leave a message for the postmaster, who was not returning their calls. Folks then contacted friends at a local central processing center in yet another town, Eureka, California, who were able to give a direct line to the Arcata postmaster. At first, the postmaster indicated nothing was wrong, but the residents, in his terms, were, quote, confused about the closure of their post office. After checking the number of ballots that had been returned from the precincts, election officials decided to resend all of those ballots. The postmaster finally provided election officials with the change of address list for all residents, and they were able to correct the database, cancel the ballots that had not yet been received, and remail ballots to all voters who had not yet returned their ballots. Obviously, Madam President, the bottom line is clear. The closures of small post offices requires more preparation and sharing of information with the residents of an impacted area, as well as agencies and businesses who rely on the post office to communicate with their customers. Had election officials not had a contact in that area, they may not have become aware of the problem until it was too late to resend the ballots. So, Madam President, under the amendment that I will be offering later with Senator Feinstein, the Postal Service would be required to notify election officials of closings and consolidations to prevent the kind of calamitous repeat of what I've described happened in a recent local election in California. Additionally, the amendment would require that the Postal Service study the effect of closing or consolidating a mail processing facility on the ability of the affected community to vote by mail and the ability of the Postal Service to deliver ballots on time in accordance with applicable state law. Madam President, discouraging voters or discouraging the millions of Americans who now have chosen this new approach to voting is not a wise or prudent step for the United States Senate to take at this time. Placing a moratorium until after the election will ensure that what is done here in the United States Senate does not negatively impact voting in Oregon, California, or the scores of other states that make extensive use of mail ballots in their elections. I hope, Madam President, it will be possible for us to win bipartisan support for the proposition that ensuring the highest level of voting participation in our country is fundamental to our democracy. I hope my colleagues will support the amendment that I intend to offer later with my colleague and friend from California, Senator Feinstein, to protect the millions of Americans who choose to vote by mail. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Iowa.
I'm here today to point out that 10 years ago this very day, this Senate decided not to drill for more oil in the United States where we know oil exists, because the argument at that time was used that why drill because it's going to take many, many years to get it online. The Senate bought the argument that we shouldn't drill because it's going to take too long. Today, we think about more opportunities to drill in the United States for oil. I want to point out that the very same arguments that were used 10 years ago are being used today, because if we drill today, we might not get some of that oil online for several years down the road. Well, we want to be thinking about the future as we should have thought about the future in 2002, 10 years ago, when we decided not to drill. Around the country, American consumers are paying near record prices for gasoline at the pump. The current average price for gasoline is near $3.90. Since January 2009, the average price of a gallon of regular gasoline has more than doubled. In 2011, consumers spent a greater percentage of their household income on gasoline than any year since 1981, when we thought 90 cents for a gallon of gas was a lot of money. Affordable energy is a major economic issue. Paying nearly $4 for gas acts like a hidden tax and results in people having less money to spend on other things. Rising energy prices also increase the cost of doing business for job creators and taking away dollars that otherwise could go to hiring workers. We should be doing everything possible to prevent these high energy prices today or tomorrow. The Senate had an opportunity, as I said, 10 years ago, today, to take action to increase our domestic oil supply. Unfortunately, the Senate missed that opportunity, missed an opportunity for lower prices today and importing something less than the $830 million every day we spend today to import oil. We need to keep that money in this country. 10 years ago today, the Senate considered an amendment offered by then-Senator Frank Murkowski, father to President Senator Murkowski, to open a tiny portion of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to oil and gas development. A vote on the cloture motion was rejected by the Democrat majority in the Senate April 18, 2002. During that debate, opponents argued that opening ANWR to development would never supply more than 2% of our nation's oil demands. They opposed it based on the belief that opening ANWR wouldn't address the real problems, namely our dependence upon fossil fuels. They said we needed to work towards a comprehensive approach. Opening ANWR was also portrayed as a distraction from the real solutions like conservation, alternative and renewable energy, and less environmentally sensitive fossil energy development. Some even argued that fully inflated or low-friction tires should be a larger part of our national energy policy. I recognize the needs for a comprehensive, balanced national energy policy. I truly believe in all of the above approach. That includes conservation, alternative and new renewable energy, nuclear power, and oil and gas development. But the fact remains, we're talking about these policies as solutions to our energy problems in 2002, yet gas prices are still near $4 a gallon. I listened to dozens of speakers in the United States Senate that day who argued against opening ANWR because it wouldn't address our near-term energy needs. They said
It would take nearly 10 years to get that oil to the consumers. 10 years ago, we were told to forget about opening ANWR because development was too far down the road to impact our energy supply and energy security. Here's a few quotes from my Democratic colleagues during the debate April 2002. I'm not going to use their names, but this Democratic senator said, quote, "I oppose the proposal to drill in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Drilling in ANWR will not increase energy independence, even if we started drilling tomorrow. The first barrel of crude oil would not make it to our market for at least 10 years, so it would not affect our current energy needs," end of quote. Another Democratic senator said, and these senators are still here today, the oil exploration in ANWR will not actually start producing oil for as many as 10 years. Exploring and drilling for oil is not forward thinking, end of quote. Another Democratic senator said this, that oil would not be available for 10 years. This means drilling in ANWR would not provide any immediate energy relief for American families, end of quote. Another Democratic senator said, quote, developing ANWR is simply not a necessary component of a progressive energy policy for this country. For a period starting at about 2012, that's this year, understand. He was looking ahead 10 years. For a period starting at about 2012, we would see an increase in domestic production under ANWR if ANWR was open to development. So development would not address the near-term prices or shortages with which people are faced. Well, 10 years down the road, here we are. But if we drilled back then, we would have this oil online, and we wouldn't be spending $830 million every day to import oil. Another senator said this, when my colleagues come to the floor of the Senate and suggest to us that the crisis in the Middle East is a reason to drill in ANWR, that is a misleading argument because no oil will flow from ANWR until from 7 to 10 years from now. That means if you open the refuge today, you're not going to see oil until about 2012, maybe a couple years earlier, end of quote. So you see a decision made in 2012, people were looking ahead 10 years and saying, well, it's not going to make much difference. But 2012 is here, and we could have been using that oil. Another senator said this, quote, oil extracted from the wildlife refuge would not reach the refineries for 7 to 10 years, end of quote. Well, that's the end of my quotes of several Democratic senators who are now serving. So if they're using that same argument now, are they going to be smart enough to look ahead to 2022 when maybe we can use that oil that we would start drilling today? The defeat of the Murkowski Amendment back in 2002 was then enormously short-sighted. If we had voted to open ANWR 10 years ago, that oil would be driving down prices at the pump for the consumers today. You know the rule of economics. You increase supply, you reduce price. And if we didn't increase supply, because you might say it's a global economy, we'd at least be keeping the money in the United States instead of spending $830 million every day to import oil. Time after time, opponents of domestic oil production have argued that because it won't lower prices at the pump today, it's not worth doing. Well, you know from the debate of 2002 that that's a bunch of hogwash. Does anyone wonder if the American people today wish that the Senate had opened ANWR 10 years ago? It is past time to take action to ramp up domestic production of traditional energy. Energy we can harvest in this country instead of importing it and paying $830 million every day to import. Greater domestic energy production would increase supply and help to lower prices. It would create American jobs. President Obama continues to push policies that contribute to higher gas prices, including restricting access to federal lands and permitting delays, regulatory threats to refineries, and his decision to deny Keystone XL decision. He says he's for all of the above. Well, when you look at that list, he's for none of the above. But limiting domestic energy production will have less supply and higher prices. The Obama administration has made things worse by restricting access to domestic energy sources. The President's record contradicts his remarks that he is for all of the above strategy. His policies have prevented more oil production in the United States and resulted in higher prices, lost opportunities for job creation, and less energy security, and shipping out of the country $830 million of our dollars that could be used in this country and kept in this country to import, we're spending to import oil. President Obama's denial of Keystone pipeline inhibits energy-related development that could create 20,000 jobs. Greater domestic energy production would increase supply and help to lower prices, and it would create American jobs. It's time to take action. Denying ANWR development 10 years ago was a mistake I hope that we learn a lesson from. The Senate missed an opportunity 10 years ago that would have brought gas prices relief and more supply, keeping more money in this country, creating jobs in this country. Right now, we shouldn't make the same mistake again. You can't repeat that statement too often. We shouldn't make the same mistake again. We should be looking ahead 10 years, like they were doing in 2002, but using it as an excuse to do nothing. So don't ever tell me that don't drill today, that it won't come online 10 years from now. That's not a very wise thing to say to me after you said it 10 years ago, and we should have learned a lesson. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I come to the floor to recognize a solemn occasion.